What's up, Twitch chat? What's up, YouTube? I think just YouTube. I think this was going straight to the tube. But we're playing through some Dimir Shadow today, or played through some Dimir Shadow. Wanted to go over some of these matches. Same list that I played on stream yesterday. I just kind of felt like playing a league off stream. I think the only difference in the 75 is in the board. I dropped the 2 Nihil Spellbomb for an unlicensed hearse, and I think the second Spreading Seas. I can't remember completely off the top of my head, but we'll see if they end up mattering. Other than that, y'all have seen a ton of Dimir Shadow on the channel recently. Very, very solid core at this point, or core that I'm very comfortable with, like the Shadows, 4 Shadow, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Consider, 4 Counterspell, 4 Drown, 4 Street Wraith, 4 Murktide. I've been 3 or 4 Murktide. I think I was on 4 instead of the Brazen Borrower this league. Mainly because I was playing this at like almost 3 a.m. and just wanted to do as least amount of thinking as possible, which is why we also don't have Brineborn Cutthroat in this league. Like when I say don't want to think at 3 a.m., I literally mean like I do not want to think about sequencing or how I need to be like ordering my Cutthroat to grow it enough to be relevant. Just not in the state of mind to do that. But anyway, we're going to run through this league, see how the list goes. As always, if you're liking this content, please consider liking the video, dropping a subscription on YouTube so we can grow the channel and we know this is like the right direction to be moving. Other than that, yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into the games, see what they look like, and talk through some sweet lines. So, round number 1. Now we're entering the Twilight Zone. Got a little bit of a stopped up nose, so if I sound extra nasally. All right, on the play. Pretty good hand. We've got some lands, Street Wraith to cycle, a bunch of interaction. Looks like we're up against Hardened Scales. I know I'm going to be like having a live Dismember, so I kind of want to just fire off the Fatal Push and like make them use up this Welding Jar, because I knew I'd be able to cycle the Wraith, fetch Shock again, get down Shadow, and have Dismember available. I didn't know I was going to find a second Shadow, so I kind of like that plan. The only thing that really punishes me is a Walking Ballista on 1 to take out 1 Shadow, in which case I'm just kind of at the same spot that I was before, where I've got like 1 Shadow out. Instead of 1 Shadow plus Dismember, now I just have 1 Shadow and Dismember in hand. And so nothing really changes from my expected path. I just have the upside of maybe I find a land and just like kill my opponent on turn 3. Thoughtseize for the information first, because I was a little afraid maybe they would scoop to Dismember. So Thoughtseize in case I see something kind of cool that I wouldn't have known about. But that's the power of Dimir Murktide. Turn 3 killed. Double Shadow, Dismember, Street Wraith. Merry Christmas. All in game 1 of the league. That's it. Pack it up. It's all downhill from here. So my opponent having Urza Saga on turn 1 is pretty interesting, because that means I don't have to worry about constructs off of it. Consider ends up finding a Spreading Seas, which is great for snagging that Saga, so they don't even get to tutor off of it now. This Patchwork Automaton and the Welding Jars, a little annoying, but ultimately, like, as long as I stay the course, I'll be able to get down a Murktide that can kind of outgrow that. Or maybe I can dress down to be able to drop that counter-making ability. This might have been a mistake on, well, I can't remember if it's this turn or next turn. I thought about just dress downing at the end of my turn so they couldn't grow this automaton on theirs. And realistically, I probably should have, And when I didn't last turn, I probably should have again this turn. And it ends up kind of biting me because I'm like, oh, second Patchwork Automaton. I could dress down. It doesn't kill the Automaton coming in, unlike a lot of the other cards that get counters on them, since Automaton does enter as a 1/1. But it would stop the original Automaton from being able to outgrow the Murktide. But part of my thought process was the only way that their Automaton can grow big enough to trade one for trade a welding jar with the Murktide is if their last card is a free artifact. And I thought the odds were pretty low. So I decided to just counter this automaton and hope they didn't have a free artifact, which they did. So now they can eat my Murktide because I have to block the automaton. Dress down, just looking for like a fatal push so I could push plus Murktide. Don't get there on to game 3. Before I forget, sideboarding against the Hardened Scales deck. It's usually like boarding out some number of Street Wraith or Thoughtseize, boarding in any copies of Dress Down, Engineered Explosives is really good. Hercule's Recalls coming in. I think that's about everything. Or at least like the big pieces of the matchup. Game 3, on the draw, they have a Gemstone Caverns. I honestly kind of forgotten that they even started playing that card, so my opponent having a turn 1 Patchwork Automaton's like pretty brutal. Luckily, Consider finds my second land, so now I've got the ability to dig a little bit more. If I have to take a hit off an Automaton, so be it. But I'll probably just end up like fatal pushing this Hangerback Walker so that I can grow my Murktide a little bit more. I'm not too concerned about the 1/1 tokens in the face of my 7/7 flyer. But this is just setting up like... All right. So my plan was to play out the Shadow, play out the Dress Down, and trade the Dress Down and the Shadow for the Automaton, and I draw a card. Because I need to get the Automaton off the board, and there's like no reason they're not going to attack into my Shadow. The Grove of the Burn Willows made that play a lot more aggressive, because now if they don't attack, they're going to just kill my Shadow with 2 Grove activations. And so now like my Shadow's a useless chump blocker anyway. So if I have the ability to trade Shadow with the Automaton, like that's a trade I'm pretty interested in taking. My opponent ends up attacking with everything, which means I can block, eat the Automaton, lose the 2 life off the Thopters. So when my Dress Down leaves, my Shadow would be alive if it weren't for the Grove of the Burn Willows. But my opponent not having a follow-up means that I do get down just like a reasonably chunky Murktide, kind of stand in the way a bit. They're not doing anything. I want to save this Spreading Seas. I wanted to save this Spreading Seas for an Urza Saga, but as soon as they go with this Ink Moth block, I kind of decide like, hey, let's just take out the second Ink Moth, not worry about that avenue, like an Arcbound Ravager into Ink Moth kill. And if they happen to top deck a Saga, that would suck. But if they had a Saga, they would have played it by now. And I don't think they're going to play around Spreading Seas. But now that I've got like Counterspell up, I just want to hold that as much as I can. And when my opponent like Besages my Spreading Seas to be able to chump block a dragon, I feel like that means I'm in decent position here. They're trying to like chip damage and I guess find a walking ballista. Decide to counter the hangerback walker. They don't have a sack outlet, so like I'm not that afraid of the hangerback itself, but it would come in with 3 counters. And if they did find like an Arcbound Ravager or something, it would go really, really wild with making tokens and just like block the Murktides or swing around them for days. And I just really didn't want to like leave it up to that fate. And then here, top deck EE, so I'm just going to pass with EE on 1. So if my opponent does find a walking ballista, I can respond to it with blowing up both of the hardened scales. It comes in with 2 counters instead of 4, and they can't kill me with that. So on to match number 2 on the play. Hold up a soft stubborn denial, but we've got dismembers to help enable our street wraith or help enable our shadow. Opponent leads on a Dragon Skull Summit. I have no idea what deck plays Dragon Skull Summit, so a little out of my element, but Dolthy Voidwalker makes it look like it's just some sort of red-black mid-range, but Dolthy is not much in the face of Shadow plus Dismember, and especially not second Shadow, second Dismember. We're thought seizing for the information just to try to find, like, we have them dead with Dismember and Stubborn Denial, and there's nothing like they can do. But I want to thought seize because I'm protected from like a lightning bolt, and I want to know if there's anything else I can gain about what my opponent might be on before I make that attack. Because like when you see Dolthy Fatal Push, it could be Rakdos Scam. It could be Rakdos Midrange. It could be, in this case, Rakdos Skelemental. And you really want to take advantage of that, like, significantly overwhelming board presence to find out, hey, this is what my opponent is. Now I'm better prepared going into game 2. So, for example, against, like, Skelemental, I'm less interested in, like, Turok. I'm a little less interested in Thoughtseize because I don't want to put myself in a position where I like kick a Turok and they top deck or have a Skelemental that they don't discard, and I just take a big hit off of that. Where in like the Scam matchup or the Rakdos mid-range matchup, I'm not going to get punished so hard for kicking that Turok and taking the 2-for-1. I'm also less excited about Stubborn Denial against Skelemental than I would be against mid-range, because there's less likelihood of like Blood Moon and Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Unlicensed Hearse and all that stuff. Opening hand had no lands. My 6 has got 1 land. Hopefully find a second, which we do. Now we can hold up Fatal Push. We've got Counterspell or Drown on turn 2. If opponent goes for a Dolthy, then pretty easy. Just like push that off a cliff. And now we've got Drown in the Lock and Counterspell up. Kind of want to use my... Usually I want to use my most restrictive counters first and like use the Drown in the Lock before the Counterspell. But I decided to hold on to the Drown in the Lock here instead so that I could hit a Skelemental if they've got like an Unearth effect. So I could kill it if they are more mana efficient at getting it back onto the battlefield. Said they go for a Ragavan, decided to just tank this hit. There's really not that much they can hit off my library that I'm like that afraid of. And I'd rather just get this draw in so that maybe I can set up next turn like Murktide plus Counterspell or something. Unfortunately, we don't hit the land drop, but that's kind of okay because we do find like the Fatal Push, so we can push this Ragavan off a cliff, hold up Counterspell, and hopefully go to our turn, hit the land, and just have like a clear board to get down a Murktide, hold up Drown in the Lock. And I feel like that Ragavan attack on their side is a spot a lot of people would interact with. Like, oh, I don't want to get hit with a Ragavan. That's really bad for me. But you just have to remember that in reality, like our deck is mostly counter spells and things like Street Wraith. Like, how many of those do we really care about our opponent hitting with a Ragavan? So they have Turok here, followed up with a Skelemental. I think they should have just kicked the Turok, but I don't play much Rakdos Skelemental, so maybe the upside of like hitting me with Skelemental, discarding the Turok is a lot higher. But I feel like if I'm passing the turn with a whole bunch of mana, but that Turok also could have been bait. That's probably the more likely scenario, is a Turok was trying to bait a counter spell. They don't hit it, so I'm just going to dress down, cut the haste off of the Lightning Skelemental, drown in the lock, the Turok to be mana efficient, and the Lightning Skelemental, since it's a delayed trigger. All right, we'll kind of talk about priority. I don't want to get too much into it. Essentially, Lightning Skelemental is like Ragavan, where it's got a delayed trigger that it sacrifices or returns to hand in the case of Ragavan at the end of the turn. Dress Down can interact kind of wonky with that. For example, if you're on your opponent's turn and you go, you have Dress Down at the end of their turn, the Dress Down sacrifices, their ability does not go on the stack because it would have already gone on the stack, but you got Dress Down out. Dress Down sacrifices, it goes your turn and sacrifices at the end of your turn. If you're on your own turn and you dress down with like a Ragavan or a Skelemental out, then I believe the dress down resolves and then the trigger, or if like it's your opponent's Ragavan, it's weird. There is a timing in which that trigger will still go on the stack on the same turn as dress down, but it has to do with like who's the active player and what's who has the dress down, who's the active player that's got the thing returning. But anyway, we get to just like wipe away this what's it called? We get to wipe away the Lightning Skelemental with the dress down, the Turok with the drown. I could have drowned the Lightning Skelemental, cast my second Murktide to grow the first Murktide up to a 10/10, but I don't do that because my opponent's got a card and got a mana, and I don't know, but they could have something here that stops me. This is something that I am famous for and try to work on. And it's the idea that I'm an idiot, plain and simple. I am horrible at remembering magic cards. I'm horrible at knowing what all of the options are. So if there's a chance to play around something that doesn't exist, I'm probably playing around the something that doesn't exist. For example, in my mind here, my opponent's got a card in hand and a mana. What if they are splashing green out of the board and they've got Run Afoul? And I go for kill the Murktide or kill the Lightning Skelemental, play my Murktide, attack for 10, and or like cast my second Murktide, and in response to the Murktide, they Run Afoul and kill my first Murktide. And then they untap and find like Liliana the Veil. I can't hold up counterspell. They make me sack my second Murktide. And now they've got like Liliana into my counterspell in hand that's going to get discarded into no board. And I like lose the game from there. Is that realistic? Absolutely not. The likelihood of my opponent splashing green and not have gotten a green land by now is astronomically low. But the alternative to that like crazy line of thinking is my opponent has got one card in hand. They've got one card that they're drawing for turn. I've got two pieces of counter magic. I can just like take the uncertainty out of the equation by just hitting them and holding up two counter spells. Like, maybe there's a chance my opponent's got some uncounterable spell, but I feel a lot more likely in knowing about the uncounterable spells than I do knowing about, like, I've got two counter spells, you've got two spells that can very likely be countered. Either way, on to match number 3. Opponent leads on a turn 1 MDSC green source and a turn 2 abundant harvest. I have no idea what they're on, but I'm assuming it's something unfair if they're playing abundant harvest. Lotus Field kind of gives away that it's like Twiddle Storm, I'm assuming, but I've never seen Twiddle Storm play like the flip lands. Vizier of Tumbling Sands. Peer Through Mist is fine. Ideas Unbound is fine because I can like counter the next thing after the Ideas Unbound. And at the end of the day, it's like card disadvantage. But I really just want to find one more land so I can get down Shadow, hold up a counter spell. But if I don't find the land, I'm more likely to die if I just play out the Shadow. So instead, we're going to be pretty passive here. Recross the paths. I should have probably just let that resolve. Like, it's kind of unfortunate that my opponent just had a whole bunch of untap effects and another recross the paths. But at the end of the day, like, the recross the path doesn't kill me. And I would have had the chance to untap, Thoughtseize, see what's actually relevant in their hand, maybe take something that's not an untap effect, and then have a counter for the payoff, which they had an Ideas Unbound. So that lets them go off. Like, their last card had to be a draw spell to have a chance. But chaining draw spells into more Ideas Unbound, more Vizier of Tumbling Sands. And then as soon as they reveal Psychic Puppetry, like, I'm kind of over at that point because that allows them to start untapping in addition to all of their arcane spells. Sideboarding against Twiddle Storm, just boarding out like all of my Fatal Pushes, Dismembers, boarding in all of my counter spells, any extra Stubborn Denial, Spell Pierce, Mystical Dispute, Fluster Storm, anything that I've got access to. Turn 1, Thoughtseize, see that they have a Turn Timber Symbiosis, no other green source. So we go ahead and take that so they can't Abundant Harvest. It looks like it, based on game 1, that they're running Abundant Harvest to find Lotus Field. Like, they probably just have one copy of Lotus Field, especially now that I've seen Goblin Charbelcher. So very likely they're just running all these flip lands so they can Charbelcher for lethal, or so that Abundant Harvest guarantees it hits Lotus Field, which is pretty cool. But here I'm a little bit of a chip situation. I know I can dress down at the end of their turn, get in for a decent hit, but I'm just looking for like one more way to lower my life total so I can get the game over. Unfortunately, we're just finding like more chump cards. At least we have like a whole mess of counter spells, so I know there's a reasonable chance that I'm going to be able to fight over anything they put on the stack as long as I don't make any real stupid decisions. Drown in the Loch there so that they can't get Lotus Field. I feel like as long as they don't have Lotus Field, I'm not that afraid here. Opponent goes for a tap effect here, or it's a Dream Grasp. I decide to Flusterstorm to try to get them to tap out so that I can just Stubborn Denial after they tap out. And they instead respond with a Psychic Puppetry, so I just get to Stubborn Denial that and go to game 3. So, works for me. Same result. Game 3, we've got a Thoughtseize, Stub, Drown. Got lands. I've got ways to lower my life total, so I'm feeling pretty decent. Then that Consider's a great pickup because that's going to allow me to find my threats. Opponent's got Turn Timber Symbiosis as their second land, so I just take that so that I can hold up my counter magic after this. Soft Stub a Defense Grid, because I know I get to untap and kick a Turok. A little bit of greed here on my part. So my opponent's got a Dreams Grip, and a Goblin Charbelcher. If they keep both Dreams Grip and Goblin Charbelcher, they can go for a Charbelcher next turn by floating 3 off the Lotus Field, paying 1 to untap it, floating 3 more, play the Charbelcher, and then they can activate it the turn after. And I really don't have a good way of interacting with that. I could just play out a 2/1 Turok and hold up my counter magic, but then I have to fight for 10 turns with 3 pieces of counter magic as opposed to kicking the Turok and fighting for 5 turns with 3 pieces of counter magic. Very, very higher odds for me if I get the Turok kicked. So I decide to be greedy, go for the Turok, try to make them discard either the Grip or the Charbelcher, which they ditch the Grip. So now, as long as they don't have another Twiddle effect right here, I should be able to untap with Turok and 3 pieces of counter magic and hopefully, like, punch across damage from here. So there's Charbelcher. We'll get that out of here. We know they've got a Sylvan Scrying in hand and 2 unknowns. I don't care about the Sylvan Scrying because I'm assuming at this point that the only thing that Sylvan Scrying can do is go get the Lotus Field that they already have. So that's basically a dead card. Recross the Paths is pretty easy counter material. Because again, I know they've got the Sylvan Scrying in hand and then 2 unknowns. So I'm just kind of like focused on fighting over the things that are important to fight over. And now that I've got a Turok on a 2-turn clock with 2 counter spells, I feel pretty good. I go for Peer Through Depths. We say, cool, you got it. Don't find anything that kills me. And then this is match number 4. Forest Utopia Sprawl on red almost assuredly means Ponza, which is weird because I haven't seen Ponza in forever. Thoughtseize to take away a Spyro. Ragavan hit, unfortunately hits our Thoughtseize. If you ever come hang out in the live stream, you know that my opponent's Ragavans hitting my Thoughtseize is like meme status of the channel at this point. It happens so disturbingly often. I have no good explanation for it. But again, like the Ragavan hit from a couple rounds ago, I kind of assume they're not going to hit anything that good. So I'm okay taking that hit, knowing that I'm just going to get to untap with a Shadow. Unfortunately, they do hit the Thoughtseize and take my second Shadow. But fortunately, I do get down this one that can outgrow Lightning Bolt with Street Wraith. They could dash in the Ragavan and have me, like, block and then bolt the Shadow after damage, but whatevs. Since the Ragavan was not dashed last turn, we'll just go ahead and Charm to steal that inside of damage, or inside of combat. If they want to bolt their own Ragavan, that's fine with me. If they don't want to bolt their Ragavan, then I get a situation like this where I get to either force the trade or make them make some sort of action. They could like block my shadow and go to bolt afterwards, in which case I'd probably just stubborn denial and save it. But instead, we just get down like second shadow and have all the counter magic in the world. On to game number 2. Sideboarding against Ponza, bringing in or boarding out just like a couple of the street wraiths. I boarded out a drown too because I'm usually expecting a bunch of like relic effects out of them. Ponza is historically a pretty decent matchup because we've got a lot of threats that just really outgrow like Fury and Lightning Bolt and Ren Pings or Chandra Torch of Defiance downticks and stuff like that. And especially with Murktide in this list being able to fly over a lot of the chump blockers, a lot of the tokens, Arbor Elves, things like that. I feel pretty good in the matchup. The only thing that really gets me is like a whole bunch of Veil of Summers and Relic of Progenitus and stuff like that. First hand had like no lands or basic island, no black sources. Second hand, we do have like a turn 2 shadow if we want it. It's not a great hand, but now it's even worse. We do have Otawara to potentially bounce the Blood Moon in a few turns. But the big issue there is like our opponent's just got 3 turns of just doing whatever they want. We can't interact with it. Realistically, I would like to keep a hand that interacts with turn 1 Blood Moon a lot better. So maybe there's an argument to mulling more aggressively for either Thoughtseize or Stubborn Denial. But I kind of figured like, oh, I've got Fatal Push for an Elf or a Ragavan on turn 1. If they just have Utopia Sprawl, I'm kind of SOL. But either way, we do find a second shadow. So after we bounce this Blood Moon, we'll be able to get down a reasonably sized board presence. The fact that they're not attacking with Arbor Elf is a little concerning here. I don't really know what that signifies. All right, so we've got more removal. If our opponent doesn't have anything crazy here. And unfortunately, Endurance is probably going to do it because now they're just going to be able to go wide around our shadows pretty easily. Especially with like the dashed Ragavan. Probably could have just gotten an island here and let this go. My assumption is, for the most part, that like I'm not winning this game if I get Blood Mooned out and one of my removal spells becomes useless. I figured I'm kind of in a really bad spot to begin with, so yeah. But we get to go to game 3 on the play. And our opponent leading with an Arbor Elf is way, way better into our hand of Dismember, double or fetch, double shock, shadow. Especially when we draw second shadows. Like, the game's easy. 2/4/4s is going to be really tough for them to deal with unless they have double fury. Thankfully, they only have one of them. So, Shadow gets to live. Begin his reign of terror, hitting my opponent in the face. We don't care about this Ren and 6. Like, let me bring up this point here. So my opponent played turn 2 Ren and 6 and got a fetch back. So I know they have guaranteed third land. That's not even up for debate. They have the third land. So I could spend a turn attacking at Ren. In which case, they still have the third land. I have not stopped them from hitting the third land magically. If they have another land in hand, then I have just time walked myself by attacking the Wren when the Wren didn't matter. The Wren was not accomplishing anything in a positive manner. So instead of attacking the Wren, sticks to them, play my Murktide, have my interaction, Wren's whatever. Like, cool, you get back a land that you might have already had. Power to you. That's what we're going to do. We're going to ignore the Wren. Opponent plays a Spyro. I was really hoping they would make tokens, so this would be a cooler play. I figured they would just ditch some stuff, make some tokens, and I'd get to go to my turn with 3 lands, EE on 0, blow it up to wipe out the tokens. EE going to the yard gives me Revolt, Fatal Push, the Seasoned Pyromancer, attack for lethal. But instead, they didn't make tokens, and I drew a fetch land, so I'm just going to kill the Spyro with that, I guess. It was so much cooler of a line in my hand before they didn't make tokens. But either way, on to match number 5. Very land light hand, but we do have just Thoughtseize, fetch, shadow. So if we find another fetch land, we can get shadow down. We Thoughtseize and see Relic, March, bunch of lands. Tinfoil hat time. We lost a trophy on stream earlier today, actually, to mono black Coffers in round 5. And if you ever want to believe, first of all, pretend this is a tinfoil hat, that Moto is rigged. You lose a trophy to a deck. You play a second league with the same deck. You run into the same deck in your trophy match again that beat you earlier because Moto doesn't want to pay out. Either way, we're just trying to find lands. I don't have the ability to hold up a counter spell on my opponent's turn. What I mean by that is when they put this Field of Ruin in the yard, they go up to 2 cards. Drown in the Loch doesn't hit anything relevant. So instead of going for the holding up Drown on their turn, I'm just going to take advantage of this Field of Ruin to float mana, Archmage's Charm myself, try to find more lands so that I can double spell next turn. If my opponent did have a payoff there, I couldn't stop it anyway. So what's the point of worrying about it if I can't do anything about it? Then we're drowning this just to try to get my opponent to use up as much resources as they can. We know they have the March of Wretched Sorrow, so Shadow gonna die one way or the other. Double Cabal Coffers, though, is really rough. We do have Murktide, but our Murktide cannot outgrow this March. All we can do is hope that our opponent, for whatever reason, passes to our turn so we can have Archmage's Charm and pass to our draw step so we can get a land and have Archmage's Charm and Drown in the Loch. And then basically tap themselves out to go for a removal spell that we can interact with. Something paid actor. Counter a Damnation. Relic is fine. I don't think they thought either they drew this second March off of the Relic, which is entirely possible, and they just wanted to play it to save or stay alive. Because if they didn't, they could have killed the Murktide. But I think they drew the second March off of the Relic. But either way, they do not find a way to kill that Murktide, and we're able to get across. In the match that we lost for the trophy earlier, our opponent had Shieldred's Edict, Damnation, Invoke Despair, all the ones that killed Murktide. This opponent's got Fatal Push and Blood Chief's Thirst. So Murktide is exponentially better against this build than it is against the one we played earlier. Unfortunately, everybody's got main deck relics nowadays, so it is what it is. Thoughtseize is a reasonable pickup. We're just trying to chug our graveyard ahead a little bit. Like, we know they're going to be able to nuke our yard. So all I can do is, like, put myself in a position where maybe they don't and I get a Murktide down, but unfortunately they do. Pretty okay just getting basic islands here because I can Turok next turn regardless. And I can hold up Drown for 0. All right, so Fatal Push the Turok makes that a 3-for-1, which is very, very solid. Also does a great job of helping to enable Drown in the lock. We find a Shadow. Unfortunately, this Relic right after means that the Drown's dead, but we've got a Shadow for half a second. We do have the cards necessary to get another Murktide, but I kind of like this Turok idea. Let's get some cards in the yard. Yep. Never mind. So we could have sat there and held up Drown, but they would have had Karn anyway, and we couldn't counter that since they wouldn't have had the cards in the yard without the Turok. Game number 3 here, I tried out something different. As you see, there is a Chalice of the Void in my opening hand. My thought here is if I get down a threat, like ASAP, then perhaps Chalice can help slow them down enough by stopping Fatal Push, Blood Chief's Thirst, Relic of Progenitus, and help me just like bridge a threat into barely squeaking by. I figured I would at least try it and see what happens. Like, I know it's awkward in a hand of shadows and subs, but the rest of my deck is counter spells and drowns and Murktides and all that stuff. Soft stub a turn 1 relic and just do like this. Go ahead and get a threat down so that next turn I might be able to fetch shock, play a shadow, and then play a chalice on one and just see what happens. Opponent marches and they miss their second land drop. So that's huge for me. Hold up soft stub. All right. So because they missed their second land drop, that's why I decided to hold up stub instead of chalice. Because if they did hit a second land, then like Night's Whisper, like that comes into play. Or if they're running chalice, that comes into play. Or if they just have another 1-drop, like another Relic of Progenitus, a Fatal Push, Blood Chief's Thirst, I can fight over that. But we end up just doing like the chalice plan here and saying, all right, let's see what happens. And what happens is my opponent has to pay 2 for their engineered explosives, which means, hey, I get a turn of a free attack here. And then kick my Turok, get some cards out of hand. They're down to 1 card. They're missing the 4th land drop. I've got a Murktide Regent. So I'm going to say that was a win for Chalice of the Void. You can disagree if you want, and I say, cool, I'm the one with the trophy. So let's talk about the list, how things performed. Turok looked really, really good in the mono black matchup. I think we played Turok like 4 times and got a total of 6 cards out of our opponent's hand for it. So that was pretty sweet. Spreading Seas sniped a Saga and hit an Ink Moth Nexus. So I have been really impressed with Spreading Seas. been seeing a large uptick in Hardened scales, so I probably need to do a matchup guide video of that, but Hercule's Recall could be one that has to stay in the sideboard, at least temporarily. Chalice, Chalice is fine. It's nothing crazy, but it's fine. I feel like if I'm seeing a bunch of Living End and Rhinos, I want the first Chalice, because we don't play any 0 drops in this list, so it's fine. I'm going to say fine a lot. It's reasonable. It's okay. What else? Didn't see Path of Peril this league, or didn't have any matchups that I really wanted Path of Peril against. Flusterstorm was fine. Stubborn Denial was great. Didn't see any Edict matches or something I wanted the second or fourth Fatal Push against. We'll keep an eye on those things. Also, didn't see any real Grave decks, so I never got to see Unlicensed Hearse. In the main deck, I mentioned this on stream yesterday. A lot of people are really liking Brianborn Cutthroat right now. Just because I play a league without Brianborn does not mean that I am off of Brianborn. I don't know how much I can possibly emphasize that. I've played the qualifier with Brianborn, which that video's up, and I believe in Brianborn Cutthroat. But sometimes at 3 a.m., you just want to go as streamlined as humanly possible. Other than that, I've been liking the second Dress Down in the main. The third Stubborn Denial's fine. It's a whole bunch of flex spots. Your games that you win 9 times out of 10 are going to be because of Death Shadow, Murktide, Counterspell, Drown in the Lock, Stubborn Denial, and everything else is just enabling those. So occasionally you'll win with the Brianborn Cutthroat because you had an extra threat. Occasionally you'll win with a Brazen Borrower if you're wanting to play that. But the bulk of your wins are coming from the same core regardless of your flex spots. So don't get too overly zealous about having to run one specific one, because at the end of the day, Brianborn Cutthroat is not Murktide or Death Shadow, which is the entire reason for playing the deck. So it's never going to be as good as those. Otherwise, yeah, hope y'all enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of the list or the matches in the comments down below. We'll have another video up pretty shortly, so be looking forward to that one. Otherwise, yeah, feel free to drop a like and follow, or check us out on stream down below. I'll have the link. Other than that, have an awesome rest of your day. Adios for now.